The Charleston Area Justice Ministry has been in the headlines this past summer. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I sit down with one of the board of directors, the Honorable Judge Arthur McFarland. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Judge McFarland, it is so good to see you.
It's good to be here with you.
I appreciate this. You know, I this is my first time actually meeting you, but I know your entire family, from William to your wife, Elise. Who is Judge McFarland these days?
Oh, Judge McFarland is a practicing attorney here in Charleston, and one who likes to engage in, making our community a better place. So I'm involved in a number of activities along those lines, highly involved in my church, which is St. Patrick.
Yes.
And so, Judge McFarland is a busy person these days.
Let me take you to that as far as helping get the community better. Obviously, you are really at the front line of the Charleston Area Justice Ministry, along with Nelson Rivers and a couple other people.
Right. I'm a member of the board of directors of Cajun.
Yes. I was interviewing Sheriff Al Cannon for my web show last week, and we talked about the Charleston Area Justice Ministry, and he told me this quote, "Don't hit me on the head as you're asking me to partner with you," and that is his message to the Charleston Area Justice Ministry. When you hear that, what sticks out to you?
Well, the first thing that sticks out to me is that I'm a little offended that he would compare what we do to some violent act such as hitting him over the head. I think what we have tried to do is to impress him through facts, statistics, and research about what needs to be done to improve his department's services to the community. Sheriff Cannon is an elected public official, and so Cajun, as a group of citizens coming to him to ask him to change conditions which many members of our community find to be abusive, who find it to be harassing, to find it to be unfair to a large segment of the community, is not hitting him over the head, but educating him in a way to make him a better sheriff of this county. And so our approach with Cajun is to help law enforcement build trust within the community it serves. And so if he sees that as beating him over the head, then his description of being beaten over the head is a mighty limited and weak one, and therefore I would suggest that the fact that he may have been criticized or have been asked by Cajun to take certain actions that will benefit all of us as citizens here is misplaced to suggest that we're beating him over the head.
The approach. I've heard from many elected officials, off camera, on camera, that they're a little uneasy with the Cajun's approach to getting what you guys want as far as making Charleston a better community. What is your definition of an approach as far as trying to get the community in a better shape from a law enforcement standpoint?
Well, particularly from a law enforcement standpoint, but from basically any standpoint, our approach has been the same for the last 5 years. We, first of all, listen to members of our community to determine what issues folks see at the grassroots level. My mother was always a person who says, look, if you're going to do anything, start at the grassroots. And so that's what we do. We hold these house meetings where we listen to stories from our congregation members who are asked the question, what worries you in the middle of the night? What might keep you awake? And the stories that are told around what keeps them awake is cataloged. In 2015, for example, there were 90 house meetings involving some 800 or 900 citizens, and we heard stories, dealing with a number of issues: education, policing, right, certainly juvenile issues. And what we do after those house meetings, we gather our network members from these 30 congregations into an assembly. we present the top 3 issues that came out of these House meetings, and we determine, we get the 600, as it was in 2015, the 600 network members who came together to vote on the single issue that we should address during that particular cycle, which was 15-16. And so in 2015, members kept telling stories about what they found, their fear of law enforcement in this community, particularly among African Americans. So the issue was discrimination in policing. We then narrowed that issue after doing some research to determine that police contact or investigatory stops were primary concerns within the subset of police discrimination. And so our research caused us to look at the police contact stops within the departments in the local area. And we found that North Charleston was number 1 in the state in investigatory stops of citizens, and Charleston was number 2. To the tune of difference of a few thousand stops between the two, but we're talking in the neighborhood of 125,000 stops in a 4-year period. For Charleston, I think it was 130,000 for North Charleston. A tremendous number of stops. Our statistics also show, because they have to record race in these stops. And just so everyone would know, an investigatory stop is a stop where no arrest or citation was issued. As a result of a 2005 state law, local departments are required to issue warning tickets whenever there is a stop, traffic or pedestrian stop, where no citation or arrest occurred. And so we looked at those statistics. These are people who were not charged with a crime. And when we looked at that, we also found that African Americans were twice as likely in both Charleston and North Charleston to be stopped over whites. And that, of course, our experts, we contacted experts from California to the East Coast, and everyone told us that pedestrian stops, investigatory stops, is evidence of racial bias in policing, if there is a disparity there. And the disparity that we found indicated to them, as well as everyone else we talked to, that there was a problem that needed to be addressed around investigatory stops. And so we, after gathering this information, we contacted the police chiefs and the mayors of Charleston and North Charleston, and told them what our findings were, and that experts had indicated that one way to build community trust is to conduct an independent external audit for bias in your police departments. And so in 2016, at our Nehemiah action at Mount Moriah, our question was, would you conduct for the mayor and city council, would you conduct an audit by an external auditing firm for racial bias within your department? Mayor Sambi did not appear at our Nehemiah action, and neither did Chief Driggers. Mayor Tecklenburg did, and members of the Charleston City Council. Michael Brown from North Charleston did appear also, the young Michael Brown.
Right.
Okay. Did appear. And so the question we posed, of course, was very specific. Would they in fact hire the OIR group to conduct an audit of the Charleston Police Department? The response we got was very interesting. It wasn't that, no, we won't do it. We're not going to do it because we don't need to. We don't have the complaints or any of the reasons we hear today. But no, you can't. We cannot pre-select a firm. We have to go through our procurement process. Requires an RFP and financing and all of that. And so the answer to our question about hiring a firm was basically no from both city council and the mayor. But we didn't stop there. Said, okay, you're not saying that an audit doesn't need to be done. It is your procedure that we need to follow. And so after the Nehemiah action, we continued to meet with the mayor. We tried to meet with the police chief before the Nehemiah action. We did have one meeting with Chief Mullen, but we could not get him to set another meeting. But Mayor Tecklenburg is the chief executive of our city. And so we continued to reach out to him, had meetings and conversations with him until November of 2016.
Okay.
Now the city did in September of 2016 issue an RFP for an efficiency audit of all departments within the city. And but that RFP did not call for a racial audit of the police department.
Okay.
And so we brought that to the mayor's attention in this meeting in November. And we pressed for the hiring of a firm to do an independent audit, separate and apart from the efficiency audit. What he was going to do in terms of the efficiency issues, assessing that for the city of Charleston was fine. Joe Raleigh had been mayor for 40 years. Apparently, Tecklenburg found it necessary that, notwithstanding all of the praise that Mayor Raleigh gets, that he needed to conduct an audit of all the departments so he would know whether changes were needed to be made or whether they were operating efficiently. So he just didn't accept, Mayor Raleigh's handing over the gavel to him, but he thought he needed to know more. And so even before he got it, that was one of his campaign promises. A racial bias audit was not his campaign promise. And so Cadron pressed him on that because that was the issue we had heard at our House meetings. Well, after that November meeting, we had planned to meet with him afterwards.
Okay.
We kept trying all the way through our Nehemiah action in 2017. He refused to meet with us. However, while he had issued the RFP for the efficiency audit, he did in apparently December or January after our November meeting, he went back to the firms that had bid on the efficiency assessment, performance assessment, and asked them to include a bias in policing in their proposal. The Novak Group apparently did that. Submitted that in January. In February, they were hired. Once we saw that Novak was the firm, we do what we always do, and that is to research and determine if the firm that they hired is capable of conducting the kind of research, had the experience in conducting the kind of research and police bias auditing that we were asking for. After looking at 15, 16 cities that they listed as part of their prior experience, we found that they had never done a racial bias audit in any of their prior contracts. And so we brought this to the attention of the city. That became our issue. If they had that experience, we would have waited until there was a completion of the overall audit, which would have included a racial bias audit. We were hopeful that would happen. However, when we saw that they didn't have the experience, it became incumbent upon us. It became necessary for us then to bring that to the attention of John Tecklenburg, who at that point, I do not believe sitting here that he understood that they did not have that kind of experience. And yet, he professed that he thought they did. So we kept pressing that issue. So at the Nehemiah action, this year at Mount Moriah, five of the black city council members showed. None of the white city council members or Mayor Tecklenburg, I call it, the fact that he led a boycott of the Nehemiah action by the white members of council. And of course they heard that from us after in the city council meetings that followed the Nehemiah action. But the black city council members came, 4 of them committed to champion the idea of an audit because they heard the stories. They heard about the folk who've been stopped and vehicles searched with no ticket issued, being held on the side of the road, young ladies who had been held on the side of the road for 45 minutes, and in one case, she had her mother on the phone so she could hear what was going on, and it was on Folly Road in the city of Charleston. John Tecklenburg heard that story, and yet you would think that if he heard that story, he would have gone back to City Hall and said, well, we need to look into this. Did this really happen? Chief Mullen, find out who that officer was and get his side of the story, because Cajun is out there promoting the idea that this young woman had been mistreated by one of our officers. So in terms of a complaint, he heard, he knew who she was. They could have contacted her, had internal affairs or their complaints department contact her and says, tell me a little bit more. Do you recall who this officer was? What time was it? Where was it? What date? They could have found all of that out. There was no follow-up. And so we certainly continued to press this because Novak was not qualified. Apparently John Tecklenburg and city council members agree with that, because now they have asked Novak to suggest at least 3 or more firms who are qualified to conduct this type audit to perform this audit for the city. So the tactics or the strategy or the methods of CAJM is based upon how do you get public officials to respond to citizens about solving serious problems in our community. When the BAR has a problem, nobody accuses them of using unfair tactics. When they put up billboards, with the Carnival cruise ship, over the steeples in Charleston, when they criticize the mayor and city council for not being sensitive to the historic preservation of Charleston, no one says, oh, we don't like the way they handle things. We have done nothing different. We've called on, we said, meet with us, talk to us, let us exchange, conversation. But when you tell us no, you are then saying you have no credibility. Who else is going to tell John Tecklenburg about unfair treatment on the street other than people who are being unfairly treated? Witnesses generally don't come forward. I saw, this young black guy being held up on the corner. That's not where complaints come from. And so when we brought that to the city, to reject that sends a message to the community in general that if these people, white and black, are saying that this is a problem and you won't accept it from them, then why should I, as a single individual, black, come to the department and expect that I'm going to be treated any differently? How is my credibility going to be any stronger than the 2,200 people that were at Mount Moriah in 15 or the 1,600 people who were at Mount Moriah in 2017? If you can't believe hearing what they say, ministers, church leaders, lawyers, doctors, who comprise CAJM, who are generally well-respected people in the community, if you're rejecting what they say, how is any single individual in Charleston should expect to be treated any better by filing a single complaint? So the whole idea of complaints, I think all the experts say you cannot use the number of complaints where there is not trust in the community. You can't look at the number of complaints as an indicator that there is not a problem.
The city says, despite your claims, CAJM's claims, there has not been any single racial bias complaint filed against the Charleston Police Department since January 2015. You say?
Well, racial bias complaint, no one filed. I'm not sure what complaint they had before 2015 that says racial bias complaint. Now, if you're talking about litigation, when you sue the city, you must allege racial bias in order to make a case.
Okay.
But if I've been mistreated on the street, I'm not going to go in and say this officer treated me the way he did because of my race or mistreated me. I'm going to say I've been mistreated by this officer. And if the number of complaints indicate that we are receiving more complaints from the African American community, that's where the conclusion of racial bias comes in. But the mere fact that I'm not sure what they mean when they say we've not received a racial bias complaint. The question is, how many complaints against your police officers have you received? Let me give you, most recently, there was an officer who shot at a moving car on Meeting Street downtown, and fortunately, he missed. But had that officer, during the middle of the day, shooting at a car moving away from him, had hit the individual driving that vehicle, we'd have a different conversation right now. Since that incident, which is a violation of policies and the rights of that individual who was being shot at, we've not had a report. Ask Mayor Tecklenburg, has he requested a report on that incident from Chief Mullen? Or what has been the outcome of any SLED investigation on that? See, you got to look at what happens when city officials become aware of incidents, what their reaction is. Mayor Tecklenburg calls for, let me know if you have a complaint. What is he going to do about it? I mean, what is it that in his experience, in the experience of citizens in this community, have they witnessed where he has addressed racial bias in any aspect of the city? And so we've got some problems here in this town that we need to fess up to. There is a history of racial bias and racism, all the way from, the fact that 40% of enslaved Africans were brought to this city to be sold into the most horrific conditions that one could experience and has experienced in America outside of perhaps the experience of Native Americans. But think about it. This city is built on the inferiority of blacks and the superiority of whites. And so we start off with how African Americans came to America through the port of Charleston, with Charlestonians making decisions and making money off of our black bodies. And then we go from there to the fact that Denmark Vesey, who was accused of planning a rebellion to free his brothers and sisters in Charleston, was executed, summarily tried and executed along with 34 other black men. Think about it. Not a single white was injured in what they said was this plan, and yet at least 35 black bodies were destroyed by hanging in this city. And then you go from there to the Articles of Secession, all signed right there on Broad Street within a couple of blocks of what is now City Hall. That happened in Charleston, not in Alabama or Mississippi. In Charleston that happened. Then, of course, we followed that with the first shots of the Civil War. All this preservation of enslavement, which is all racism. And so what happened after Reconstruction, which was short-lived, and then Jim Crow and segregation? Charleston did not voluntarily change. Black folk had to march along King Street just to get jobs, to desegregate. They had to wade in. We've got all that history that no one seems to talk about, and it's never been talked about. So we end up in 2015 with Walter Scott's shooting in North Charleston, and then we have the slaughter at Emmanuel AME Church. Think about it. Miss Jackson was shot 11 times by a white supremacist. That is the essence of what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls the destruction of black bodies. Those 70 some odd bullets fired by that white supremacist was designed to destroy black bodies in the heart of Charleston, in the heart of the historic district. And so what was it, and we have to ask the question, what was it about Charleston that made him think that this was the place to start his race war? And so this idea of race and racism, I know for a lot of white Americans is difficult to address, because we all would like to believe that that was our ancestors, or they would like to believe it was their ancestors who did that. Oh, it's nothing, we're not beneficiaries, our privilege is not there. So when the mayor says we don't have enough complaints, how many complaints is necessary? In North Charleston, it only took one murder to cause a sea change, for them to bring in someone to do an audit. Is that what's necessary? And even after the Emmanuel 9, you would think that we would be asking the hard questions about race in Charleston. And so Cajun presented Charleston with an opportunity to really shine. Oh yeah, we're going to voluntarily look at our police department to make sure we rooted out a culture of racism. And that's our strategy. That's our mission. And the success of that mission will be like the success we had in terms of getting the Charleston County School District to increase the number of pre-K slots, or the sheriffs and the police chiefs in Charleston County to implement a risk assessment system so that young boys and girls who are primarily African American don't spend time in jail when their situation does not warrant it. Or getting the Charleston County School District to implement the positive behavioral intervention system within the Charleston County School District to reduce the expulsion and arrest rates in our schools of kids from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. Those are all initiatives of Cajun. So when someone says, I don't want to be beaten over the head when you're trying to work with me, ask Superintendent Postlethwaite when they put in the budget more money for restorative justice and PBIS in the current school district, whether she felt that she had to be beaten over the head to do something to reduce, the adverse impact of black children being mistreated, in essence, in our school district. I heard a statistic just the other day from Brian Stevenson, who related that the Bureau of Prison Statistics now says that 1 out of every 3 black males will spend time in jail or prison. I've got a 2.5-year-old grandson, and when I heard that, I thought about him. What is his future? He and 2 of his friends are standing there. One of them will end up in jail or prison. The same last weekend, report about young black girls at 5 years old are thought to be more mature than young white girls, are 5 times more likely to be arrested in school than white girls, twice as likely to be arrested in schools than white boys. Black girls, young black girls, okay? So when we hear all of this, when we hear about arrest, where does the idea of arrest start? It generally starts with a police officer. So if we can address the culture surrounding police officers and police departments, then we could probably address those statistics. Now I know it's a lot more complicated than just police arrest, because the whole criminal justice system has to be looked at, and they've got some things going on here in Charleston designed to do that. But it starts with police officers, prosecutors, judges, the whole correction system, how we get treated. But but it starts with the culture that's developed on how black men particularly, but now we know it's girls and women, how they are viewed. And this whole idea of the audit will allow the department to implement the kind of training, the kind of assessment, the kind of hiring that must go on in order to build trust with particularly the African American community, and then be able to get the cooperation that law enforcement requires. See, law enforcement is a reaction generally to crime, and so it requires cooperation from members of our community. So if you are in the east side of Charleston and there's an incident there, you weren't there when it happened, but you need someone to say, I'm going to report, I'm going to tell what happened, because I don't fear that there'll be any retribution either from the perpetrator, or the police may mistake me as the perpetrator, okay? And so that, I think, is what all of what we're trying to convey to city officials, the mayor, police chief, and council, that we're on the same team. We trying to work with you, not against you. We haven't accused you of being biased. We just said, look, do an audit to determine if there is bias. And if there isn't any, we'll be very satisfied that Charleston is the kind of city it says it is. But if there is, what are you going to do to make it the city you claim it is? And so that's what Cajun is all about. Okay.
You talk about Charleston. Let me describe to me the following one word: cheap red model retiring.
Surprising. I mean, that's the one word I would use for that, because I don't believe there was any indication he was just being touted the month before, 2 months ago, to be placed in charge of both police and fire within the city of Charleston. Even with the criticisms that occurred at the May 23rd meeting by black members of City Council, it didn't appear that there was enough there to suggest that he would quit. He's been engaged in a number of things within the community, so it was surprising that he resigned. But what that means is that what we're asking for in terms of this audit becomes an opportunity for the city, so that before hiring or while bringing on a new police chief, just as John Tecklenburg thought that on the heels of being elected behind Joe Riley, he needed to do an assessment of all city departments, it is just as appropriate that there be an audit of the police department as a new chief is being hired, so that that chief will quickly be able to assess what needs to be done to make his now department operate efficiently, and that he has the trust of the community, that he doesn't have to start from ground zero in terms of is there trust. Everybody likes to think that everything's okay until you start pulling back the scab on the wound, and then you get all this infection rising to the surface. And so that's what we're looking. That's what I think has to be looked at. And so Chief Mullen's resignation is another word to be opportunity. Opportunity for John Tecklenburg as a new mayor to again have another position, like all new mayors want to do. They want to put their own people in place. So he can now put someone in place, but also bring someone in who then would have the benefit of this audit, at least with respect to racial bias. Now he's going to have the benefit of the efficiency performance assessment that NOVAC is doing. But on top of that, policing in America now is in many ways hampered by the lack of trust within the minority or the black and brown communities. And so someone coming in ought to know whether the history of this department, and I think I've said earlier, my own personal experience as a judge,
Right.
I know that history involved some very serious fear being placed in the black community because of the mistreatment that African Americans have suffered at the hands of some of our police officers. Not all. I think I'll quickly say that I've got many men and women on the department. I left there now 7 years ago, and who I still communicate with, who, when we see each other, greet each other out of regard and respect. And so I know, even as a judge, I know officers who had credibility issues because that's not something that you see in a single case. But I also know those officers whose credibility I certainly did not question going in, just listening to their testimony and the testimony of some defendants. Mm-hmm. And so I think this opportunity that having a new police chief gives the mayor and city council, I think is great. I don't know of public safety, the public safety committee in Charleston, ever questioning, what's going on in the Charleston Police Department. I mean, there have been complaints from officers. The chief even talked about the turnover in his department. Of course, he's, I believe, said that was due to officers leaving for jobs paying more money. I thought Charleston was one of the highest salaried departments in the state, but the turnover there, and I'm not sure that city council has ever questioned the turnover at the Charleston Police Department. And that's something that perhaps this audit, the performance assessment, might uncover. Certainly bias for racial discrimination in policing would uncover, what is the ratio of African American and white officers in the city, the makeup of Charleston. I mean, those are questions that experts tend to ask, and we ought to be asking that question in our community undergoing serious changes. I mean, gentrification, we talk about that all the time, but the more we talk about it, the more it happens.
Well, Judge Arthur McFarland, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Thank you. I'm glad I had the opportunity at least to give CAJM's side. Okay. I mean, CAJM is an effective organization and really ought to be thanked rather than criticized.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thank you.